Dancer Talks.
Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of Dancer Talks. My name is McCall Sheets and I'll be your host. Today I have the fabulous Fernando with us.
Fabulous, huh?
And we're going to be chatting all about his life, what he's doing right now, and everything in between. So can you tell me a little bit about your dance journey and what brought you to be here today, and also founding Artists of Impact?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, the fabulous Fernando. I don't know that I've ever been introduced that way before, but I love it. Maybe we'll have to make it a thing. So my name is Fernando. I'm a professional ballet dancer, first and foremost. I started dancing when I was 9 in ballroom dance. I'm not sure that everyone knows that, but I was a competitive ballroom dancer for 3 years. I started taking ballet predominantly because I was a ballroom dancer. I was basically forced into it. I did not want to take ballet. But something about it eventually kind of just took hold of me. And I transitioned from ballroom to ballet exclusively. I trained at the Royal Ballet School for 3 years in London, graduated and went to the Houston Ballet for 5 years. Had an amazing time there, danced in like 200 plus performances, 7 world premieres. It was a great time. Even throughout COVID, it was still a great place to be. And and I left about 1.5 years ago now, I think, to start Artists of Impact, which is a nonprofit that I started to try and get more influential artists supporting the most effective charities in the world.
Amazing. So what inspired you to sign the Giving What We Can pledge?
Okay, yeah. So for those who don't know, Giving What We Can is an organization that basically fosters a global community of people, ordinary people from all walks of life who are passionate about making the world a better place. And their way of doing it is by signing a public pledge to commit 10% of their pre-tax earnings every year to charity, and not only charity, but to the most effective charities in the world. So when I was 21, I think, and working at the Houston Ballet, I started learning more about some of the issues in the world and just how lucky I was to be in the position that I was. Maybe to just kind of delve a little bit more deeply into that. Here I was, a 21-year-old who was making in the range of $50,000 to $60,000 a year, thinking that I was totally like, lower middle class, whatever. But when you actually zoom out on the global scale, you see that someone who's making that much is actually in the richest 2% of people in the world. And I thought that was crazy. And I was like, wow, I'm so lucky. I feel like I want to help others and give back. And there's a whole bunch of other reasons that I could go into, but that was sort of what got me interested in giving what we can, and one of the main reasons why I decided to start giving.
That's awesome. So what do you mean by the most effective charities?
Yes, very good question. So most people don't know just how many nonprofits, registered nonprofits and charities there are in the world. So in the US alone, there are about 1.7 million. So for any aspiring do-gooder who wants to help others and try and make a positive change in the world, there's too many options. It's really hard to know where to start. And so most of the time what you see is people will sort of pick at random, and they'll typically pick just whatever organizations are sort of most in front of them. So usually these are organizations that maybe they know someone that works there, or they know someone who has a certain affliction or something, and so they're going to donate to something that deals in that particular issue. Or they just stumble across some marketing out there and they say, okay, I'm just going to give there. And I think that's amazing. But I think that there's also an alternative approach that one can take, which is sort of this kind of effective giving approach to giving, which is basically when you are a little bit more agnostic as to what exact cause or charity you want to give to. And what you really care about most is where can your donations and your support improve the most lives in the biggest way. And when you do that, you stumble across a pretty short list of charities that just really strongly outperform the rest. So for example, at Artists of Impact, we work with 3 to 4 charity evaluators, independent party, third-party charity evaluators that spend all year researching what the most effective charities are. And then we use those recommendations and offer those up to our supporters and our donors.
Awesome. What are some of your favorite charities that you've worked with?
Ooh, that's a good question. So there's a lot of issues in the world, of course, and so I personally am very emotionally attached to a couple different ones. So some organizations that I find really, really inspiring in the work they do are Helen Keller International is one, and their vitamin A supplementation program. So for those who don't know, vitamin A deficiency is one of the leading killers of children under the age of 5 in the world.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah, and it's also one of the leading causes of blindness in children. And it's incredibly, incredibly cheap to sort of avert those deaths and avert those cases of blindness. So the treatment, I think, costs anywhere between $1 and $2 for a year for a child. And you can expect to roughly prevent a child from dying for every $5,000 donated, which I think is just unbelievable. Because for me, you know, an extra $5,000 a year in income, like, sure, like that'll make a difference. It'll improve the quality of my life slightly, but it's not life and death. Whereas if I decide to, you know, donate 10% of my income and that amounts to $5,000, I could literally save someone's life every year.
That's amazing.
So yeah, no brainer for me. That's one organization. Another one that I really love is the Against Malaria Foundation, which provides insecticide-treated bed nets for people to sleep under, because malaria isn't really a thing in the U.S., as you know, and when it is, it's incredibly easy to treat. But in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, it is a death sentence, and it's actually the leading cause of death in pregnant women. So for a lot of people that are really passionate about maternal health and things like that, this is a huge issue that often goes under the radar. Yeah, it costs about $5 to make, ship, deliver, install everything, a net that will protect 2 kids for about 3 years. So yeah, it's one of my faves for sure.
Wow, that's incredible. It's crazy because we don't see these things happening in the US, but then the more aware we are about these situations, the more we want to help out. And I mean, that's what makes your organization so impactful.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, so this is one of the things that I think is unique about what we do, is that a big part of what we do is basically sit down and have conversations with these artists. And a big part of it is uncovering some of these limitations that are holding them back from achieving their full potential with their charity work. Things like psychological biases, cognitive biases. And so like the one that you just mentioned, there's a name to it. It's called the availability bias. And so for people like us, we're here in New York City today. Yeah, we're not going to see many people, you know, dying from vitamin A deficiency because we're surrounded by relative wealth and affluence. And even the people here living in poverty, the poverty line in the U.S. is still, I want to say, close to 25 to 50 times higher than the extreme poverty rate, where more than 1 billion people still live. So that's one thing. Another thing is just sort of like general cognitive biases around certain unconscious prejudices that we have. Because I think when asked point blank if we think the life of someone, say for example here in the US, is worth the same or more than the life of another person 10,000 miles away in another continent, most people I think would say no. And yet most of our philanthropic spending in the US, at least, doesn't go abroad, despite the fact that it can have roughly 100 times the impact and help 100 times more people abroad. So yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, but these are things most people don't know. And like you said, one of the things that I love about this type of work is that when I sit down and have these talks, everyone for the most part wants to help, and they want to have an impact. They want to change people's lives for the better and change animals' lives for the better. They just don't have the tools to do it. And so that's hopefully where myself and my team can come in and help provide those tools.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
So can you tell me a little bit about how you get started working with someone and what you provide for them and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I see our role really as trying to help these world-class and influential artists become world-class and influential givers. And I think one misconception I think that a lot of people have is that giving can only be about money. And so in working with a lot of artists, like a lot of industries, the distribution and income is not even. It's what you might call long-tailed. And so some people at the very top make the vast majority of the money and get the vast majority of the attention, whereas the majority of people get much, much, much less. But there's a vast score of incredible artists who have platforms and who are passionate, who want to have an impact, who may not have much money to give, but they're willing to use their platforms and their voice to augment the reach of these charities. And because like I said, so I named 2 charities. There's about 6 to 12 more that we work to support. And these charities get less than 4% of all philanthropic dollars, despite the fact that they all have huge funding gaps, which means that basically we're leaving a ton of impact on the table. And so using platforms is a huge way that artists can have an impact, and it's one of the main reasons why I wanted to work with artists and creators, because when it comes to influencing the broader culture and scene, I think there are a few other subgroups that have as big of an impact.
Yeah, and I feel like in today's day and age, influencers are all about influencing people to buy things, whereas what you're doing is you're helping people influence people to help others and create change in the world, which is what we really need. We don't need any more stuff. We don't really need to buy anything else.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's something that, the more that I age, every year that goes by, I realize more and more just how few things are truly important in making my life better. And I mean, we know this empirically too. There's a lot of studies that show that past a certain point, additional income really doesn't do much to improve the quality of one's life. Whereas we have pretty robust evidence that actually giving and donating and helping others can substantially and vastly outperform consumption when it comes to improving our own lives. So in a way, being selfless is actually one of the most selfish things you can do too. And yeah, I'd love to see a world in which we embrace that side of influence more.
Yeah, and I mean, giving to others, at least for me, it feels so good. I mean, just even giving a gift to a friend.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, oh, I feel so great after I did that. Yes, I spent my money on it, or I spent a lot of time creating something, but it's more of a reward as well, like you said. And yeah, even giving, and like, I actually did this program called Juntos, and I went and I taught in Guatemala in rural villages. And I wasn't performing or teaching in like the biggest stages or the biggest schools, but it was more like the most rewarding thing that I've ever done is helping people who may never have that experience again, or may never see dance again like that, or ever be taught like how to do something like that. And it was amazing. Yeah. So yeah, that what you're doing is great too.
Thank you. Yeah, no, if I may speak on that briefly, I think so. I think I'm now in my 4th year as a pledge member with Giving What We Can, and it is really just interesting how profound a decision like that can be, because I think, in a sense, I recognize that it is selfless, but I really think that it was a very selfishly motivated decision too, because so for me, I touched on it briefly earlier, but I think one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to sign the pledge was because I thought about like what my ideal self would do. So I'm pretty big into self-help, personal development, all those things. I want to learn and grow every day. And one of these concepts that sort of came up through my readings was just thinking about sort of your future self, like that version of you that is say all the virtues that you hope to embody, but just maybe more, if that's how you perceive him. So for me, it's someone who's maybe a bit wiser and who's maybe a little less impulsive and who is more caring, who other people want to be around because he makes them feel good. And when I stop to ask myself, like, okay, this version of me, this better version of me, would they, dedicate a meaningful portion of their life, their time, their energy, their resources towards trying to help others in the most effective ways? And yeah, I mean, it was the most obvious answer ever. And I think, for me, it was an absolute no-brainer. And in doing so, in sort of trying to align my present self with that future self, I feel like I got the longer end of the stick, because I don't think you can pay for that kind of feeling of just feeling like your values and your actions are aligned. Like that, it's one of the greatest feelings in the world, and I hope everyone experiences it at some point.
Yeah, it's kind of like the most selfish, selfless thing that you can do in your life. And why not? Like, how does that hurt,
Yeah, I don't see them as mutually exclusive. I think
Yeah.
I used to. I think I used to care so much about like what someone's intentions were. Like, oh, if you're doing this for any other reason than just to like help someone without any other kind of aspersions or anything, I don't know, it just doesn't really make much sense to me. I think we can have a lot of different motivations for giving, to help others, to help yourself, to be a bigger part of your community, to feel more connected to others. Like, there's a million reasons to give.
There are. So another question I have is, how do you make these connections with all the people that you want to help influence and create change? Do you contact them? Do you know many people? Do you know friends of friends? Do you, how do you get in contact with these people?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways, and I'm definitely still learning how best to do these things, and I'm failing a lot in the process. I don't for a second want to make it seem like making some of these connections has been easy. But really, I think it really just comes down to, say, outreach, networking, or finding your people, as my sister would say, and just sort of putting your mission and your values out there into the world. This is something that I have sort of been leaning into a lot more recently. As you mentioned earlier when we were talking before we started recording, I started posting these daily sort of vlogs, and the number of people that have reached out and commented and wanted to get in touch because of that has been huge.
Yeah, like me.
Like
I found
here.
the daily video, the daily vlog, and I was like, wow, this is really awesome.
Yeah.
We should do a podcast.
We should, and here we are. Yeah, no, it's one of these things. So I like to call it like leaving room for serendipity. So like, I think if all we can ever do is control the inputs that we control. So like, what are the actions that we're going to take? The outcomes are going to take care of themselves if you take care of the inputs. And so reaching out to people, putting content out there, putting your mission and your goals out there, leave room for other people to step in and be like, hey, I think this is really cool. I want to help. Because again, I think there's so many people out there that want to help, that want to be a part of something bigger, that just need the opportunity to present itself. And so I reach out to people on social media, I email people, I have been connected with a lot of people through networking and such. And just be proactive, get out there, and I've got a long way to go, but I look forward to continuing to explore and hopefully have better answers further down the line.
So if someone listening to this or watching this right now wants to get involved, what would be one of the first steps they could take?
Yeah, well, I think probably the first and easiest step would be to either go to our website at artistofimpact.org or to reach out to me directly at fernando@artistofimpact.org. That's my email, so you can reach me there, ask any questions, I'd be happy to hear from any and all of you.
So what are some of your top finance tips for dancers?
Yeah, okay, so this is going to depend a little bit on what type of dancer we're talking about. So Just for background, when I was at Houston Ballet, I was like obsessed with this concept known as FIRE. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. So it's an acronym that stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. It's basically where you try and save and invest as much money as you can, so that you can create a portfolio of investments that eventually pay you more in returns every year than your salary, and then you can quit your job and retire.
Wow.
So yeah, it's basically just like retirement, what you would do in retirement, but on a very, very accelerated timeline. And so yeah, I got super obsessed with that. It's what led me to start investing in index funds. It's what got me to buy my first and second properties in Houston. And it's something that has given me a lot more flexibility in my life sort of since. And so when I was in my last year in the company, I was talking to a lot of my friends because a lot of them would come up to me and ask all these questions about investing and this and that. And I realized that like as dancers, most people, a lot of these people start working when they're like 17, and they only ever went to like a dance school. And I know that financial education actually in normal schools isn't much better, but there's a huge gap wherein just like a lot of people in that age, 17 to low 20s, just like really don't know anything about investing and saving and budgeting and stuff. And so I ended up doing a couple little like free webinars with some of my coworkers at Houston Ballet, and then I did one a bit more recently with some dancers from I think 4 different US companies, and just talking about some of the basics there. So anyway, sorry, that was a bit of context. Yeah, so I mean, I think if you're in a company and you have a pretty stable paycheck, I think some of the best things that you can do is just figure out what your non-discretionary spending is. So like, what are your like bare bone necessities that you need every single month? What is your discretionary spending? And then basically try and figure out a savings rate that makes sense, sort of with those things in mind, and then try and pay yourself first, which basically means try and take that money for your savings and your investments out of the accounts as quickly and as automated as possible. Because the more you leave that to chance, the less likely it is to happen. So as dancers, I think personal finance is especially important because one, our careers are much shorter, and so you don't have 40 years to save for retirement. You know that within a couple years you're going to be experiencing some kind of transition, and if you can have a financial pillow, it's going to be much less stressful. I can vouch for that firsthand. I'm sure you can as well, and going to school and all that. Like, there's just, life happens. And so having a bit of an emergency fund is key. That would be my second tip. Have at least $1,000 saved for emergencies, because the amount of financial stress that will relieve you of is huge. And then there's obviously more specific things that we could get into later, but things like, invest in diversified index funds. That's what I do. And yeah, just keep learning. Those are kind of some of the biggest tips.
Those are awesome. What are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned in your 15 years of dance?
Yeah, I think there's one that I think is kind of the most important one. So I'll say it first, and then maybe I'll elaborate on it. It's just dancing. Have fun. Like, that's it. I realized that I went to a pretty elite school where my classmates were pretty gosh darn amazing. I went from being like the only boy in a studio to being one of 15, and really not being one of the better ones. And so just like having that level, being surrounded by that level, really pushed me to like want to get better, and in most senses in a healthy way. But there's also just like a tremendous amount of pressure that I think came with that. And then when you go to a company and you want to get certain roles and you want to do this and that, you really start to take dance very seriously. But I think sometimes in a detrimental way. And I think most of my colleagues take themselves and their work too seriously, not in the sense of like they approach it with professionalism and all that. Like, that's a good type of seriousness. But when dance stops becoming as fun because you're taking it that seriously, like, it holds, I think it holds most dancers back. And I found that when I knew that I was leaving Houston Ballet and I started to take things a little less seriously, I think I actually got better. And now,
Yeah.
now that I'm freelancing, I'm dancing way less than I was before. But every time I go to class, like I'm smiling, I'm crying happy tears at bar, like, and I'm genuinely,
That's how I feel.
I, I'm not being hyperbolic. I literally was almost in tears last week in ballet class at bar. And it's like, yeah, because you realize like dance is a beautiful thing. Like we all started because we love doing it. Well, I hope that's why most of us started doing it. And I think it's very easy to lose that when you're at a, you know, a very good school or a very good company. And I genuinely think if you take things a little less seriously, you remember, hey, this is just dancing. I'm having fun. Your dancing will improve. Your life, the quality of life will improve. So yeah, I think that's probably my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, the same thing happened to me. Throughout my time, I went to the Ely school and it was super competitive and insane. And I was injured so much that every time, like when I was very serious and like so focused, and then I got injured and I was back down to earth, I was like, oh wait, this is where I am right now. And once I finished my time at this school, I realized, wow, like there's so much more to life, but also dance is so, you know, it's, you can't take it for granted, and you can't also take yourself too seriously in that aspect. So it's like a gift. Absolutely. So every time I have the chance to dance, it's like, oh, this is a gift. And today I don't have a broken foot. Today I'm happy. Like I'm not competing against someone else. For me, I feel like I always compete against myself. Yeah. And I do it because I love it. And yeah, when I stopped stressing so much, I actually improved. Yeah. What are some common issues that you see in ballet company leadership?
Yeah, so just to preface, I have never been part of a leadership team within the ballet world, and so all of my opinions on this are just based on my experience working in a couple different companies, and then my experience in having conversations with friends from around the world that are at a bunch of different companies. Yeah, so I think a lot of the issues stem from the fact that ballet is an art form, and as such, it's subjective. And because it's subjective, a lot of the decisions around casting, promotions, and rewards and incentives in the industry are just very just ambiguous at best. And so I think it becomes very hard for dancers to know what they should be doing, how they should be doing things in order to achieve some of their goals. For example, I have a lot of friends that care a lot about roles, and there are certain roles that they want to do in their career. And oftentimes, you know, casting will come out and they're not on there. And it's like, oh, okay, what could I have done better or differently to improve sort of the odds of my doing that? Because like in the real world, a lot of times people in different lines of work, they can point to sort of more objective metrics to be like, hey, so say I'm a sales rep and like my sales are up 15% this year, blah, blah, blah. I'm comparatively, you know, my numbers stack up well compared to others, et cetera, and they can negotiate for a raise or a bonus or something like that. Well, one, in the dance world, I think a lot of people are scared to advocate for themselves along those lines, but it's also hard to do that because you don't really know what those things are that that sort of a director might want to see in you. And so, so like some of the things that I am a really big proponent of is like, I think it would be amazing if, say, on the first day of a season, if someone on the artistic staff, if not the director, just has like a 10-minute intro talk with the new dancers and saying like, hey guys, like and gals, sorry, I'm Californian, so we say guys a lot, but hey, friends, like welcome, like if you're here, this means that we obviously see something great in you, we want you to be here, we're excited to have you. These are some of the things that are really important to us, so say if you're an apprentice or first year core, like what we really need from you is to really like know your parts. You're probably not going to dance too much in the early parts because you're inexperienced, but we want to know that we can turn to you if we need you, and that's really where a lot of the value is going to come early on. And then for more senior ranking dancers, like we really want to, emphasize artistry and this and that, and so these are some of the things that we think are important. Because yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, there's always going to be a lot of decisions that are just at the sole discretion of artistic management. But I think empowering your dancers with these kinds of expectations and these kinds of this kind of information, I think would be really helpful in them sort of understanding the process better and better setting them up better for success and saying, okay, like I know my director really cares about these things. I'm going to try and work on those things more.
Yeah.
For starters, yeah.
I feel like it gets hard because some people that I know have been in the same position in a company for a long time, and then they see newer dancers who join and then suddenly get promoted very quickly, and then they don't really know why. Mm-hmm. Why am I here and why is this person there? And yeah, the dance world is so subjective.
Yeah.
And that's art.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if it's going to be a job, then there should be something that you should know, like how do I move up?
Yeah, I think, just being a little bit more explicit about what some of those things I think can help sort of mitigate just the craziness of it being so subjective.
Yeah.
Is saying like, yes, at the end of the day, this is still going to be subjective, but here are like the things that we know are important and will sort of improve your odds of success. Because we've all seen it. So people, getting promoted out of the blue, and you're just like, whoa, like, how did this happen? Like, that's super cool. Like, I want to be in that position too. What can I do to improve my odds of doing that? Because I feel like in most situations, it's just like, oh, like, I don't know. It's super like, it's super vague and super all that. So.
Yeah, or when they're hiring someone, like you obviously hired this person for a reason, but then hiring someone and not fulfilling what you hired them to be, or hiring them and then just leaving them in the same place is very confusing for the person, the dancer.
Yeah, I mean, because I think everyone benefits from having more engaged and more sort of like activated dancers, like people that like are working on themselves and trying to become better because they have goals and they have all this. Everyone benefits from that, the audience, the artistic staff, everyone. And so I think there's a lot of like really small things that have pretty high upside, because going back to the whole setting of expectations, like when I joined Houston Ballet, for example, I obviously like knew sort of some things of what I should expect, just having like come up in Royal and worked with Royal in Birmingham as an intern while I was in school. Like I kind of knew how things worked, but not really. And so I made a ton of mistakes that could have easily been avoided if someone had been like, hey, so by the way, this is how we do things. Like when you go to the theater, like X, Y, and Z, like, all the unspoken rules that you learn just like with experience, like you could shortcut that so easily and improve and shorten the learning curve for so many dancers so quickly with like a 10-minute talk.
Or just like a paper.
Or a paper, yeah.
Here's what to do and what not to do.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. So yeah, hopefully that answers that.
What are some of the biggest mistakes that you've made as a professional dancer?
Yeah, so I'd say probably the biggest one is the one I touched on earlier. It was just about sort of taking things too seriously and not enjoying myself enough. Because at the end of the day, I think dance is a gift, and I think it's easy to forget that when your livelihood depends on it and when your identity is just completely intertwined with it. But I think beyond that, like I mentioned earlier, I think it's good to take dance seriously in the sense of, you set goals for yourself, you have aspirations of what you want to achieve with it. And I think so the biggest mistakes I made there were just working hard but not working smart. So I think one of the things that I'm really grateful for my time at Royal was just being surrounded by such hard workers. There were a couple people in my class that were just absolutely incredible in terms of the dedication that they had to the craft, and I feel like I did absorb some of that. I didn't, however, absorb quite so much of the wisdom in knowing sort of how best to allocate my time, and so I've realized that the vast majority, I think, of sort of like the 80-20 breakdown of what has most improved my dancing has been just more dancing and deliberate practice around weak skills. The challenge is that those are the hardest things to do because they're the activities that most show you how terrible you are. So, for example, in talking to a lot of principal dancers and stuff, one of the things that you just see over and over is just how early they started working on variations, pause, and things like that. And then you wonder, oh, why are they so good at pas de deux, variations, and things like that? And it's like, oh, well, because they've been doing them consistently since they were very, very young. And so I'd say for anyone that wants to get to that level, I think just, being brave enough to try, record yourself. That's something I never did that I've started doing recently and I think is super important. Game footage. Like, what sports athlete doesn't watch game footage? And yet here we are. Yes, and we're not, it's not a sport, but like it's incredibly athletic, it's skill-based. We need visual cues, especially if we don't have a coach. That's one of the most important parts of deliberate practice is short feedback loops. So I think not recording myself enough was huge. So I guess I'd say those are the three things. So one, not having fun. Two, not doing the difficult things that will most improve my dancing. And then three, not recording myself, which is kind of the same as number two.
Those are really good. I feel like sometimes we can get focused on specific things that may not even be the right things for us in dance. Like, I don't know, working on something that we're already good at just because it makes us feel good. Like,
for sure.
People who are good at turns just keep turning around, and maybe you need to work on adagio or something like that.
Yeah.
And so that's something also that came to me, but when I was older, because when I was younger, I was always practicing the things I was good at.
Yeah. Oh, me too. Yeah. No, and I think this time on the outside working on non-dance related things has really helped me gain perspective on this because when you start doing something that you have no skill in, you're not going to want to do it because you're terrible at it, and no one likes being terrible at things. And so you have to go through that period of not being good in order to then get good, so that you may then enjoy it and do it more. And so it makes perfect sense that turners get better at turning, jumpers get better at jumping. But if you want to be the best overall version of yourself, then you have to have the discipline to work on the things that you don't enjoy because you're not good at.
I mean, going off of your point, one of the reasons why I got injured so many times was because I was focusing on the wrong things and I would be doing way too much. Like for me, I'm still kind of a perfectionist, but I was so focused on, being so perfect in everything I ate, being so perfect in every class I took, and like taking like 3 ballet classes every day at my school. Yeah. And then after that, going to the gym and like running 4 miles, and like that's way too much.
Yeah.
So like prioritizing what you actually need to work on, and I think that also comes with age, like learning and maturing. But if you can learn something from this and you're a young dancer watching, it's that.
Learn from the mistakes of others. Yeah, don't make all these same mistakes yourself. Yeah, so actually this reminds me of another sort of thing that I have noticed, going back to our question about issues I see in the ballet world. So because ballet is incredibly athletic, but it's not a competitive sport, I've noticed that it tends to lag a little bit behind some of the sports science stuff. And this isn't me speaking, this is like me having had a lot of conversations with a lot of PTs, ATs, physical trainers, athletic trainers and stuff in the dance world, and noticing that, some of these sort of concepts like periodization and things like that have been a bit slow on the uptake in dance. And so like one of the things that you notice, some companies are doing a much better job of, but some really aren't, is ramping up training and intensity after a long break. So sometimes you'll have a 4 or 5 week summer break and you have choreographers in on day one auditioning people for their upcoming reps. And it's like, as much as you hope that everyone is staying in shape over the summer, that's their downtime. Like
It's a
not
little wild to
it's not
assume.
yeah, it's not realistic to assume that. And even if it were, like I think it's it's an unnecessary risk that you're playing, because at the end of the day, if people get injured, like that's bad for everyone. And so I think, yeah, learning to like taper intensity early on, as well as I had friends at Royal that would periodize, and so they would like go really hard on Mondays, and then on Tuesdays they would take it pretty easy, and then on Wednesday they would go really hard, because like your body needs time to adjust and grow, and yeah, I think just going back to that, like more isn't always better. There is an 80-20 here. There is diminishing returns, and if you can just focus more on deliberate practice and a little less on intensity, probably better off.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why, viewers, you may not know this, but I'm in school and I'm studying pre-med right now. And one of the reasons why I'm so into that is because there's such a lack in the dance world. And there's not a lot of science behind a lot of the things that we do. It's more like, oh, this is tradition.
Yeah.
And I'm now a runner too, and so once I started running, I could see all of these scientific things that people have learned about running and how they implement it, and I realized, wow, that would be so cool if we did that in dance, and how much better we would be and stronger, and you know, maybe the jumps would be higher and we would be more agile and able to do many more performances and express ourselves better if we had all this. So hopefully one day. Yeah, for sure. Actually, okay, this is a pet peeve of mine that I noticed that like I was just super guilty of as well, is that like, so one thing we know pretty concretely in sports medicine, from what I've learned, is that like just like stretching for an hour before class does not count as a warm-up. Okay, so young dancers, like I know it's gonna feel good, because like you're like, wow, my turnout is so good, like, and it feels good to have good turnout, but like it's just not doing anything to fire up those muscles, to get the synovial fluid going so that your joints and stuff move better. And what's interesting too, side note, one of the best things I think anyone can do is like look at like what the best people do. And like when I look at all the principal dancers that I worked with at Houston Ballet, for example, or at Royal and things like that, this is not what they're doing before class. Most of them are doing some sort of Pilates, active, like muscle activation. They're doing like very smart warm-ups, and you can actually tell, I think, a lot about a person's dancing from their warm-up exclusively, because you can see, oh, this is a mature dancer that has a good understanding of biomechanics and all that. And so yeah, take your cue from that, I think, if you aspire to having similar levels of success. That's really good to know. Where do you see your organization, Artists of Impact, 1, 5, and 10 years down the line?
Well, I think if all goes well and we're able to sort of just reach the goals that we'd like to reach, I'd love to just create a culture within the arts world that in which every influential artist is an effective giver in some vein, one in which they know where their support can go the farthest and the furthest, I should say, and where in a world in which they're willing and happy and inspired to do that with their audiences.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, organizations like that, I feel like maybe in 1 year it's gonna boom and you'll have millions of dollars that you're donating. And you never know, so it's kind of exciting to see how it's going to grow. So thank you so much for joining me and for having this amazing chat. And where can people find you on the internet, follow your journey, follow your organization?
Yeah, well, if you want to follow me directly, the best place to do that is Instagram. So it's my full name, Fernando Martin Gullens, on Instagram. If you want to follow more about Artists of Impact, you can follow us on Instagram at Artists of Impact, or go to our website at artistsofImpact.org.
All right, awesome. You can follow me at Dancer Talks on Instagram, dancertalks.com, and Dancer Talks Podcast and YouTube. And I'm McCall Sheets. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you so much for watching. Bye. Dancer Talks.